This episode of Jack is brought to you by Weaver Leather.
Al did better this time. I didn't haul him very far, but you can see that he got sweaty, all this dappling in through here. That's all just nervous sweat, because the other two horses in here with Al aren't sweating at all. When we're training a horse, we're always training it both physically and emotionally. But if you want to say that there's a couple common mistakes that are made, I would say that professional trainers will often look more at the physical results and maybe ignore a little bit more of the emotional things that are going on with the horse. And sometimes somebody who has a horse for the enjoyment in the backyard, they might go to the other extreme a little bit, and they might ignore some of the physical response things that are going on and be a little more likely to be worried about the horse's emotions and what they think and whether the horse likes them or not. I think that in the end, what we need to find is a balance for both. And that is a balance between training exercises that teach the horse to physically respect our space and listen to us, but also take into account what the horse is emotionally going through. And one of the reasons I think that a professional horse trainer might fall into the category of ignoring the emotional side just a little bit more is, and I know this because of experience, is that when you get into a crunch where you're riding a lot of different horses, you tend to care more about what physically ends up happening with them, and it kind of needs to fit into a time frame. And just like building a relationship with your kids or with your spouse or with a good friend, it takes a lot of time spent with that person, not necessarily in kind of a structured situation, for you to really get to where you can feel like you can open up. And so one of the things I really like to do with my horses is I like to do quite a bit of ponying them. I do it at different stages. I do my emotional training in all kinds of different ways. But basically, to sum it up, would be I want to get the horse thinking outside the box. So if I've got a horse like Al, who kind of has a little bit of a preconceived notion of what people do and why because of his history of training, being a racehorse and just kind of learning that one system, what I wanted to do with Al was I wanted to help him by giving him the opportunity to experience trail riding and some other things that might help him be a little less stressed out about hauling in particular. Al probably already has experience in ponying from being on the track, but I'm going to go ahead and, just like I did with Jack, I'm going to pony him some from Popcorn with the hopes of actually being able to take Al on some trail rides ponying him. Because Al had such of a nervous reaction to being trailered the other day, probably because he's expecting to end up at a racetrack and be expected to run real hard or something, I actually want to give him something else, so I want to see if I can take him and pony him on some trail rides and give him some other kind of a thought. Keep in mind that my main goal during this trail ride was to show Al that every trailer ride doesn't end in hard work. In my program, I would consider this to be part of the emotional training. I hauled Al to several different locations during the time that I had him, and I repeated this same type of routine where we would show up, unload, get saddled up, and then basically pony or do just something very light and easy. Each trip, Al was a little less nervous in the trailer. He always loaded and unloaded fine. He just would visibly get sweaty and a little bit shaky in the beginning. But by the time that I returned him to new vocations, he was no longer sweating from the emotional stress of the thought of what might be coming up after the trailer ride. Al's face was so cute when we got down to the stream. I'm not sure how much water he'd seen before this, and Popcorn really likes to play in the water, but Al was a little bit like, no, I don't think this is a good idea. One thing that's interesting is that I'm going to let this video play in real time, and you'll notice that this is not a tug of war. I just gave him time to think, time to watch Popcorn move around, and eventually he goes ahead and he makes the decision to come in. And I think it's important to remember that this whole lesson was based around this being an emotional focus on this whole ride. And so keeping it calm, keeping it cool, and giving the horse time to think is always important. And it just happens to stand out really well in this video clip.